Hello everyone, Kim Ja here with you for another week of very informative in Practopia. Thank you for joining me. If you're here for the first time, I hope you stay throughout and that you would have learned something new about the Caribbean. If you're back again, thank you so much. Today on the show, we have our second in a two-part series on medical tourism. My guest is Dr. Juliet Skinner, co-founder, director of Barbados Fertility Center. We had a wonderful interview and I think you will love it. Also on the show, we have Did You Know? Offshore medical schools in the Caribbean. We will end the show with Ode to the Caribbean quote and the announcement of next week's guest. And as always, we have announcements. First up in announcements, our rate and review box. We've posted it on every podcast and ITV video page on the website, and we'd love for you to give it a rating. It's out of 5 stars, and the more we do that, the more interaction we know that the website is getting. So once you're on www.inpractopia.com and you listen to the podcast or watch the video edit, please give it a rating. We'd love that. Also, we're in the process of adding a calendar of events. We're opening up in Practopia to include events happening around the region. Anything to do with Caribbean goodness, we will be posting it on a monthly basis, and be sure to look at what's happening around the region. If you're down there and you're looking for something to go to, something to be a part of, we will start to incorporate that in our events calendar. So we're very happy that we're able to do that, expand the reach of Inpractopia so that you're in touch with the Caribbean a little more intimately. Also, we're building our photo gallery. So I invite you, if you've been to the Caribbean and you have good pictures, could be of a popular site or a new hideaway that you found out and you loved it, please send it to us. We put it in our Inpractopia Nation community and we'll share it with our visitors. So send us a photo with your name and a brief description of where that photo was taken in the Caribbean, and we'd love to be able to put that on the website and also incorporate it in the show. So because we're continuously looking for ways to improve on the entertainment and the information value of Inpractopia, and we can only do that with your participation. So we're looking forward to you sending your photos to info@inpractopia.com. Also reviewing the posts on the website. Like I said, Inpractopia is going places, so come along with us. Having said that, now let's get the show on the road. Time now for Did You Know? Where offshore medical schools are located in the Caribbean. Dutch Caribbean, Aruba, Bonaire, Curacao, Saba, and Saint Martin. English Caribbean, Anguilla, Antigua and Barbuda, Barbados, Cayman Islands, Dominica, Grenada, Jamaica, Montserrat, St. Kitts and Nevis, St. Lucia, and St. Vincent and the Grenadines. Spanish Caribbean, Cuba, and the Dominican Republic. You know, if I were a betting girl, I would bet that there are a number of you listening who didn't know there were so many Caribbean countries that had offshore medical schools. I, for one, didn't know that there were so many, so I am positive that you and I are learning a lot on Inpractopia. Now I'm so happy to present to you the second part of our medical tourism discussion, this time with Dr. Juliet Skinner, director, co-founder of Barbados Fertility Center, where she talks about how she and some colleagues were able to fulfill a need for fertility treatment in the region, what they've managed to achieve in just over 10 years in operation, and how Barbados is well suited for tourism and world-class healthcare service.
Well, I guess how it got started was that I'm a Barbadian and I trained abroad. I trained in Ireland and I returned to Barbados at the very end of '99. And in the first few years of being back, I was very impressed generally with some aspects of healthcare. But one area that was lacking was infertility services. And in 2002, the opportunity arose with Irish colleagues to develop the centre. And I guess the conceptualisation of Barbados Fertility Centre was born in 2002. And at that point, the model was to put a fertility clinic in that would not only treat Barbadians, but to treat the rest of the world. Because as an island only of 250,000 people, it's too small to support a fertility clinic. You need about 750,000 at least. And, the model scientifically, if you like, was yes, you can put the best unit in with the best lab and the best technology per se. But there was also an added value, which was felt to be the destination. That being located in Barbados would have to have a positive impact on the stress levels. And therefore, the hypothesis, if you like, was by putting that unit in Barbados, could we improve success rates above and beyond what was scientifically possible in other countries? So that's where the vision came from. And what happened in the next sort of year or two was very much the establishment of the infrastructure, so that, physically the doctor, the nurse, the IVF laboratory. And our first actual IVF baby was born in 2003 on the 8th of October. Okay.
Oh, wow. So that's a nice success story to start off our conversation with. But you started off talking about having a clinic for Barbados. And I wanted to ask, is fertility or infertility an issue in the Caribbean? Is it something that's prevalent?
I think for it? I get asked this question in every single interview I do, Kim. Mm-hmm. And it's always astounding that people say, well, we don't have a problem of infertility in the Caribbean. And that's not true. We're no different than anywhere in the world. Infertility affects approximately 1 in 6 couples who go to try to conceive and fail to do so. And in fact, the statistics, if you look at World Health Organization statistics on developing world, actually suggest it's even more common, not less common. Certainly, our own assessment of the Caribbean, as we have been treating patients now for 12 years plus, is very much that perhaps some of the underlying causes are different. So, for example, we certainly see an extremely high prevalence of very severe male factor in the Caribbean. Mm. And, there's no doubt that there's also a very common chlamydial factor. And when, certainly that affects your likelihood of conceiving via a tubal factor. So that infertility for tubal factor reasons or for male factor are significantly more common, perhaps, than if we use the same analysis on our international patients that we treat.
Oh, wow. So let's move forward. Where are your patients coming from?
Yeah, so basically to walk back from the 2002, as we developed the clinic, and the model was always that, yes, as we developed and grew the clinic, it was to treat patients from all over the world. Which leads us nicely to this question, which is that, most of our patients don't live on the island of Barbados. In fact, only 15% of who I treat live here. The other 85% travel to us from around the world. And yes, that may be up or down the Caribbean. So, the Caribbean, as you know, is a large place. It's 7 million people, not including Jamaica. And we have many of our patients that will travel from, as far north as BVI and as far south as obviously Trinidad and Tobago, mm-hmm. That are within the Caribbean. But yes, we have a significant percentage of our patients that come to us from countries that are first world countries that you would normally not assume that they would leave for IVF care. But from the US, Canada, the UK. In fact, in the last year, we've had a number of patients come to us from Australia and China. Wow. As well as other parts of mainland Europe. So, really, it's quite astounding. And I think, one of our management staff said, interestingly, that, take a map and throw a dart at it, and it's almost a case of we've had a patient from there.
So is it a case where the location is ideal for people from everywhere to come to and get their services?
Yeah, I think that, Barbados itself as a destination is a great choice. I mean, Barbados has a very well-established tourism industry. It's been an attractive destination, particularly within Europe and the UK. Its nickname is Little England, as you probably know. Yes. But again, geographically, we're very close to the US. There are a number of daily flights per day from the US. So I think what we've seen in terms of, why do patients travel? That is a question that's answered according to where the person comes from. So certainly if you focus just for a moment on just the international patients, what we've found is that certainly the reasons for travel will differ between one side of the Atlantic and the other. So in the UK, for example, the most common reason that we'll see travel, initiated for the consideration of leaving the UK for treatment will be either availability of service being a problem, such as, for example, donor eggs being much more limited in the UK, particularly for patients that maybe are from the Caribbean, in their generations before, where they need a black egg donor, for example. That might take 5 or 6 years or even longer if they waited in the UK, whereas we can usually find them an egg donor within 3 months. Equally, in terms of the other side of the Atlantic, what drives an American couple to sometimes consider treatment often will start with a little word cost, with a very big meaning.
Yes.
That, the cost of healthcare in the US is significant, and therefore a patient can travel to Barbados, have their fertility treatment at Barbados Fertility Centre, their flights, their accommodation, and still spend less than they would if they were at home.
So you did a good job of talking about tying all of those advantages and what your services are in to get your fertility services taken care of in Barbados. You also talked about being able to get donors, and I wanted to find out a little bit more about that. What your services and the processes are in terms of being able to contribute to the clinic.
Yeah, well, we offer a full range of fertility services. The only thing that we do not do is surrogacy, okay? And that's in part because the law of Barbados doesn't recognize surrogacy, as it doesn't in many countries. So we treat patients with standard IVF, for example, or ICSI. We also then have donor gametes, so donor eggs or donor sperm, as the case may be. In the case of donor eggs, to drill down to the area that we led into, patients can go with known egg donors, where obviously they will bring a family member themselves generally, or they can choose to go with anonymous egg donation. We work with agencies, so there are agencies all around the world that may, the patient themselves may have found a donor through, okay, which they contract from that agency. But we also ourselves have our own donor program, which is donors who come forward to us and wish to be a donor. So they undergo a medical screening process, a gynecological screening process. They have their hormones tested to be sure they have a normal ovarian reserve. They have an infective screen. They have a psychological analysis. And then, very similar to it's done in the UK or in the US, for example, they're then matched with a recipient couple, and the treatment is planned from there.
Depending on what people need, how long is the stay?
Yeah, so take to walk you through an IVF cycle. IVF starts with generally someone being put on the pill for scheduling purposes and to prepare them for the IVF process. Then they would start on various medications to start to stimulate the ovaries. And at the end of the first week, that's when we really need to start to monitor them and to evaluate. At one point within those first few days after that week, they will then be deemed to be ready to have an egg retrieval. And 3 to 5 days later, embryos are transferred. So the point from the start of the pill to the point of the actual transfer is generally going to run between 6 and 8 weeks. Mm-hmm. The patient only needs to be in Barbados for about 10 days of that 6 or 8 weeks. Okay, and that's a phase from the point that we start to monitor at the end of the first week of stimulation to the point of the embryo transfer.
So, I'm thinking that you're having a good success rate since you started. What are some of the things your patients are saying in terms of how they feel about your service and when they actually do conceive?
Yeah, well, I think, that's something that has been incredibly rewarding for all of us. We've, from the very, very start, one of our models was that it's about improving patient care. It's about individualizing care. Unfortunately, in some of the big centers around the world, a patient really does feel like a number, and they don't feel that the best has been done for them. At the end of the day, ultimately, unfortunately, we can't make everybody pregnant. There are patients that, unfortunately, perhaps for various reasons, it just simply can't happen. But what we want most of all is to be sure that at the end of treating a couple, that we can put our hand on our heart and we can say that we have done the best that we could have for that couple. And hopefully that best is enough and that they're obviously pregnant. So, I think that that's something that we pride ourselves with, that very much from the point of that patient contacting us, they're going to be, linked in with via an email contact or a phone call with a nurse coordinator who's going to go through their own history. There's then going to be a process that they send some records, and then they will then be scheduled for a telephone consult with me. Mm-hmm. We literally go through everything that's been done before, any previous treatments, and at that point then you will say, right, but in your specific case, these are the logical things that we would want to do differently. This is what your next step is. And ultimately then a tailor-made treatment for that patient is put in place. And then it's a case of scheduling and planning towards it. And I think that it's very, very important that, yes, there's so many times that you go through someone's history and you think, well, look, this hasn't been thought about, or we need to do this slightly differently. And we really do. It's not some sort of rubber stamp that's what the IVF treatment is and hopefully it works or hopefully it doesn't. We really do try to individualize it according to that person.
Wow, wonderful. Can you talk about specifically the cost of getting treatment there?
Unfortunately, the cost of IVF around the world is significant. It does vary around the world. So when we talk about cost, there's two main contributing agents to cost. It's your IVF process, which is independent of age. It is the treatment type you need, whether that's IVF or whether that's ICSI, where we inject sperm in, for example. And then you have the medications that patient would need. So the most common medications we're referring to are the stimulation medications and the IVF medications, and that varies significantly with the female age. For example, IVF at our center costs about $5,500 US plus medications. Now, medications will add anywhere between $1,000 and $4,000 depending on the age of the lady. You've got a 25-year-old, she'll probably only spend about 1,000 medications.
Wow.
But you've got a 52-year-old, she might spend 4,000 or even sometimes a little bit even above that. So that's how you compare. But if you said what's the average cost doing IVF, including medications at the average age going through, it's probably about $7,500 to $8,000 US. Now, if you compare that to the average cost of someone having IVF treatment in the US, that realistically is going to be much more in the vicinity of $15,000, $16,000 US. So there's a significant difference.
That is significant. Last week I had an interview with Bob Pretty, who is the president of American World Clinics, and they're doing a lot of work down in the region under medical tourism, and it's really booming around the region where islands are finding different medical services to offer people who come. Do you also market yourself under medical tourism umbrella?
Yes, very much so. 85% of who we treat don't live here. So, this has always been medical tourism and an example of it. And I think that, medical tourism, it's sort of a buzzword that began to be a buzzword in 2005, 6, and 7. And I think it's been referred to under a couple of different headings since. But I think at the end of the day, ultimately, the concept that someone travels specifically for medical health care is really what we're talking about. For example, in our case, yes, they're coming specifically for a fertility treatment. That person's focus is their medical care. Yes, they're going to enjoy the destination as well. There's no doubt about that. But they wouldn't simply choose Barbados if we didn't have a good IVF program.
You're right about that. So things is it safe to say that things are going well for you? What do you think the future is looking like for Barbados Fertility Center?
Yeah, I mean, just to take us back from that initial conceptualization, we grew to the point that by 2005, we were being very much picked up on world stages. So, we were being written about in the English Times, American newspapers. We were being asked to speak at conferences all around the world on medical tourism. In terms of the number of patients that we were treating, that exponentially grew from 2003, 4, and literally you're talking about a 30 to 50% growth right up to 2008, where it sort of with recession did sort of hover slightly, dropped to very, very minuscule. But again, in the last 3 years, we've been back on the rise, doing more and more treatments. We continue to expand, and we continue to always have that vision of saying, what can we do better? How can we improve this? So within the team, obviously, we've expanded our team. So as that decade has gone on, we have more and more staff to provide this service. This year, the big addition was another doctor to work alongside me, because up until that point, I was the only physician working in the clinic. We now have Dr. Corona, who's joined our team since July, and it's fantastic. She's come out of Europe. She is extremely well trained, a lovely, lovely person, fabulous doctor, and, we're looking forward to continuing and growing further and further.
What else can I say except great job? It's a good growing portfolio from Barbados, because there's so much that Barbados has to offer and so much Barbados is known for around the world already, and adding fertility and clearing up all of the stereotypes, especially in the region around the whole issue of infertility. Even I had to ask the question. I didn't know what level we were at in terms of not being able to conceive in the region. So I thank you for that.
You're welcome.
How about that? Yay for Barbados and yay for Dr. Skinner and her team for the services that they provide, both for Caribbean people and visitors who come in for their special fertility treatments. If you missed last week's episode, which was part 1 in our medical tourism discussion, it is still available, my chat with Mr. Robert Priddy on American World Clinic's work in building hospitals in the region. There are other islands already offering medical tourism services, a list which I pointed out in that episode with Mr. Robert Priddy. So be sure to check that out on their website, www.inpractopia.com. I should also say at this point that you could follow us on Twitter at Inpractopia, like us on Facebook, facebook.com/Inpractopia. The show is also available on iTunes and Stitcher for download. Mr. Charles B. Rangel, U.S. Congressman, brings today's Ode to the Caribbean quote, where he says, "Today, many Caribbean workers can be found in the hospital, construction, service, and hotel industries, but there is also a growing professional sector." That is so true. The Caribbean is, like I always say, becoming the next big thing for everything that's happening in the world. Well, next week we have Dr. Sylvia Charles, economist, who's talking about her wish for economic and sustainable development for the Caribbean. Be sure to come around for that. In the meantime, don't forget to visit the website, drop us a line at info@inpractopia.com, follow us on all the social networks, brag about Inpractopia, share. I can't say it enough. And I'll be right here next time in Inpractopia.